am the shadow on the moon at night, filling your dreams to the brim with fright. The fear of blood tends to create fear for the flesh. Hello everyone, and welcome to day 18 of Terrorthon, Archaic Archetypes.
That's a mouthful.
You're absolutely right, Mr. Kennedy. Now, about that Redfield bloodline. Anyway, just to break it down simply for those who don't know, archaic means old and out of date, old-fashioned, and an archetype is something very typical, stereotypical, you might even say. So, in short, we're discussing horror movie stereotypes today. Have you ever watched a horror movie and thought, I've seen this exact character in this movie, so many movies? Well, there are a fair few character types that seem to show up in horror movies all the time. And they're an important part of a horror movie and are tropes unto themselves. So let's have a look at some of them right now. Starting with the nerd. Now this one's a little self-explanatory, I figure. It's a very, very smart character, usually unattractive and often quite annoying as well. They very, very rarely survive until the end of the movie. Here are some examples for you. You've got Egon in Ghostbusters, Randy Meeks in Scream, and Joey Burns in Friday the 13th Part 5. Next up we've got the Harbinger. This is a very common one. It's usually an old man or woman who warns the group, don't go to that scary place or you will surely die. For obvious reasons, you generally only see them at the beginning of the movie, and a lot of the time they just disappear and are never seen again, but sometimes they are killed off themselves. Some famous examples would be Ralph Neely from Friday the 13th Parts 1 and 2, Judd Crandall from Pet Sematary, and Marion Walker from Dead Silence. Next is the Hunter, a very interesting character trope. This character has already dealt with the evil that is featuring in the movie in the past, and is determined to hunt them down at the cost of everything, usually unsuccessfully. Some examples would be Samuel Loomis from Halloween, Ellen Ripley in Aliens, and Van Helsing in pretty much every Dracula movie. And now seemingly the polar opposite of the Hunter, the Cop. Usually the cop is not going to believe the protagonist that there's any monster in the first place, and then if they do believe them, the horror movie will play with your expectations that the cop is going to be the one to save the day, but it never, ever happens, and they're usually very stupid, and sometimes even make the problem worse. Some examples, including my personal favourite, Curtis Mooney from Killer Clowns from Outer Space, Sheriff Buster from Misery, and Natasha Weston from Jeepers Creepers. Next up we got the Jock. This guy is sort of like a villain almost. He's usually a complete dick to all of his group, and he always wants to be the one to fight the monster, and a lot of the time, again, playing with your expectations, you expect he's going to be the one to bring him down. But the thing is, the Jock usually dies first, and that increases tension, because now you're thinking, well, how the hell are they going to beat the monster in a one-on-one now? Some examples would be Kerr Smith from Final Destination, Jonas Cozell from Jennifer's Body, and Barry Cox from I Know What You Did Last Summer. Now we've got the final girl. We have discussed this trope at length in the past. So, in short, it's a virgin, usually, a sexless woman who's very innocent, and she's always the one to survive to the end and beat the monster. If you want examples, look at the Final Girl video, there are tons of them. In contrast to the final girl, we've got the bad girl. Usually very promiscuous, always wants to do the wrong thing, and usually dies, if not first, then second or third, usually quite close to the beginning of the movie because they're so naughty that they deserve it. Some examples would be Tina in A Nightmare on Elm Street, Chris from Carrie, and Danielle from Trick or Treat. Now we've got the stoner. Pretty self-explanatory, usually pretty useless, and you just see them and you know, yeah, they're gonna die any minute now. Sit around getting high, think everything's hilarious, and don't usually put up much of an effort to fight the monster. Some examples, we've got Ed from Shaun of the Dead, Palmer from The Thing, and Morgan Hardesty from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake that came out in 2003. Next up is the hysteric, someone who has encountered the monster and has gone almost completely catatonic as a result. Pretty much useless, just sits around in a daze, just completely traumatized by what they've experienced. Not all of the time, sometimes they'll break out of it in a last minute twist, but not often. Some examples would be Barbara from Night of the Living Dead, probably the first example of this, Laura from Saw 2, and Wendy in The Shining, an example of the hysteric getting her act together. And finally for this video we have the Token. Now I think we all know about this trope, the black guy always dies first, and that's really all there is to say about it. It's not very common anymore for obvious reasons, it never should have been in the first place. Scream 2 parodied this heavily to great effect. Some examples of this horrible trope would be Dick Halloran in The Shining, Spider in Return of the Living Dead, and Officer Rennie in A Quiet Place Part 2. If you want a film that examines all of these archaic archetypes, I highly recommend The Cabin in the Woods, which deconstructs the horror movie and all of its trappings, and includes pretty much all of these stereotypes. It's really good. You don't tend to see characters as clear-cut as this in modern movies, and that's a good thing. Keep us on our toes, please, horror. See you tomorrow.
Leon, 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 Leon.